listening to all the other really good ideas that people have talked about, I think we can also step back one more step further and think about how the activities program fits within the context of the life of the person. So we don't want to think of the activities program as like a separate offering. It should be part of clinical care. It's part of lifestyle care. It's part of meeting their needs. It's not an additional extra.
Silver Adventures is a content and technology company dedicated to improving the lives of older adults through immersive virtual reality experiences. And this podcast is our opportunity to hear from industry experts, thought leaders, and passionate individuals to share with you their knowledge, expertise, and experiences. Welcome to the Aged Care Enrichment Podcast. I'm your host, 𝗡𝗘𝗪, and this is our very first panel episode. After some feedback from you guys, our listeners, we decided to break up our in-depth one-on-one interviews and present an open-form discussion on a topic that many of us will be familiar with: activities and recreation in aged care. And we've assembled an international panel of experts and practitioners to share their experiences and insights in this vast field, and how we can overcome some common challenges and deliver more engaging programs for care recipients. Joining us on the show today is Lee-Fay, a Professor of Health and Ageing at the University of Sydney, as well as an aged care and dementia care researcher and author. Maurie Voisey-Barlin, an Australian creative engagement specialist who works with care recipients, particularly in one-on-one settings. Orquidea Tamayo Mortera, President of the New Zealand Society of Diversional and Recreational Therapists. And Stranburg and Sara Kyle, Principals at LE3 Solution, an American aged care consultancy specialising in engagement programs. This conversation raises a lot of questions, like the need for spontaneity in activities programs, who's responsible for engagement, and some ways to develop more personal and effective programs for care recipients. This is a brand new format for us, and we'll be releasing these panel episodes once a month. But if you love our normal program, you don't have to worry, it'll be back next week. And that's it. So I hope you enjoy our very first panel episode on activities and engagement programming. So our crack squad for today, we're going to go around the chat and introduce ourselves. Maurie, can we start with you?
Hi, Ash. My name is Maurie Voisey-Barlin, and I'm a creative engagement specialist. I deliver creative therapeutic weekly sessions to about 60 elders living in residential aged care, and these sessions are one-on-one. I would work with people with various stages of dementia and or people that are self-isolating is primarily where I'm focused. And, of course, people with distressed behaviours or reactive behaviours.
Perfect. Thanks, Maurie. And Orquidea?
Kia ora, everyone. I am Orquidea, and I am a registered diversional and recreational therapist in New Zealand. And my role is as the president of the New Zealand Society of Therapists. So basically supporting around 2,000 recreational therapists across the country. Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Welcome. And Lee-Fay.
G'day. I'm Lee-Fay. I'm a psychologist and professor in aging and health at the University of Sydney. And I'm so excited to learn from everyone about how we can better engage our elders.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lee-Fay. And Stranburg and Sara Kyle.
Hello, everyone. This is Stranburg. I'm principal at LE3 Solutions, and we are part of a strategic consulting firm based out of Lake Mary, Florida in the U.S.
That's it. Sara from LE3 Solutions.
Perfect. Love it. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. And let's just jump right into it. Today, we're talking about activities, engagement, leisure, and all sorts of different programming solutions for aged care of different types. And I wanted to pose a question first to, maybe we'll start with Kelly here. This is a question about if we're starting from scratch with an activities program in a residential care facility, or we're looking to overhaul what the existing offerings. What do you think is the very first step to consider?
The first step to consider is, what is your community's or your residential settings process to get to know the resident? And what is that process? What is the cadence that you connect with the resident? So is it day one when they move in? Those of us who worked in a community would probably tell you that's not wise. They're going through a lot as they transition. And then where does this information get housed? And how deep do we go? And Sara and I continuously emphasize the need to go deeper beyond surface interests, hobbies, that we need to start to get to know people on a much deeper level. But that is always where we want to start, is how well do we know our residents? And what is that process?
I think in my experience, definitely a great point, getting to know the process, the person's life story, abilities, cognitive abilities, physical abilities, desires. I think due to the context of Aotearoa, New Zealand, culture, definitely that's something that it's kind of predominant in this country, and the level of emotional need. So that's, I think, something that I will definitely focus on when I am looking at providing therapeutic recreation on a specific program, or just facilitating something that is meaningful for the person.
Fantastic. And if I can stay with you there, Orquidea, are we trying to present a selection of activities that will appeal to a wide number of people, or are we trying to focus on more specific group?
Well, I think it really depends in the place where you are facilitating, because we have come a long way, and I believe that we're changing the way on how we facilitate social engagement in order to enhance quality of life, which used to be just developing a timetable Monday to Friday, 9 to 3. That doesn't work. I mean, even for ourselves, that's not the way that we work when we go on holidays. We have choices. And it is important to actually, depending on the resources that you will have on site, to look at the numbers, to do a good assessment, to have conversations with the families, the whānau, because at the end of the day, regardless of the program that you are going to be offering within a facility of 100 people, you need to have the ability to provide something that is going to be meeting the needs of all those people, but at the same time, provide those one-on-one engagements.
And you mentioned there that one-on-one is going to play a part of it. Maurie, you've identified yourself as a one-on-one specialist practitioner. How do you reconcile this one-on-one versus group engagement?
Yeah, there's some really important points there that have raised, and particularly for Kelly talked about surface interests, and this is a really key thing. I do some very little group work, and there's reasons for that, which we can circle back to. But one-on-one is where I specialise to cater for those individual interests, and often it's exploratory to find out to get those deeper interests unearthed, so that we can find, I can add to the process of how that information is collected, and then how that is shared with the team, the multidisciplinary care team. I run a review of the program and the engagement 6 monthly. And so this is where we bring everyone together to talk about those very things. So my work being one-on-one is much more focused on having individual interactions for those that are self-isolating, that aren't participating in larger social group activities. And so I have to work very hard at finding time and finding the place where I can do that with individuals, so that they're not presented in a group, because obviously someone that self-isolates will withdraw in a group, and the person that maybe is more dominant, more outgoing, is likely to take over the interaction. So I need to I do a lot of room visits, and this requires some support from the team in them attending with me, so that in that way it can model to the team how I'm interacting and the way that I'm discovering the preferred interaction style of each individual. I call it the preferred interaction style, the way they like to be dealt with.
Listening to all the other really good ideas that people have talked about, I think we can also step back one more step further and think about how the activities program fits within the context of the life of the person. So we don't want to think of the activities program as like a separate offering. It should be part of clinical care. It's part of lifestyle care. It's part of like meeting their needs. It's not an additional extra that that you check box. And how that program is embedded, I guess, in the care plans of the elders, in how staff treat them, like not just during the activities, but afterwards and before and during other care processes. I think that's really an important part of making a meaningful and useful activities program. So it's not just a calendar of events.
Great. And Lee-Fay, can you just double down there and explain, so when you said that activities will be part of a care plan, my initial thought is like, oh, is there mandatory singing at this time? Does this person need to have X, Y, and Z? You know, that when you say care plan, that's what I think. But how do you integrate that in a more organic way?
If we know the person well, then we know how they like to interact and what their needs are. And so someone might hate groups, have never wanted to be grouped, never gone to a group, and would absolutely, yell and pick and scream or leave if you force them to group singing. And they might want someone like Maurie or a friendly care worker to just chat with them or play cards with them, once a day. That might be what's in their care plan. Whereas if you have someone who's very sociable, they might go to every single group that the facility offers, including groups outside the unit in which she works in. And you might find her a special role as a volunteer to facilitate groups. So it's really knowing the person, for every person, knowing that they're getting the right types of activities and socialization. So not missing anyone. That's why it should go in their care plan.
On that note of the care plan and going back to the preferred interaction style, if you can unlock how someone likes to interact. So I'm thinking of one particular resident that likes to create mutual mischief. And that's, for him in his early stages of dementia, he's quite concerned and depressed about his plight, that he, as he calls it. So he likes to have a mischievous kind of interaction. And what has happened at that service is that we've been, playing around with that and writing letters to the manager for various things, which the manager plays along with. And staff have begun to interact in that and have also been asking to read the letter. What have you written this week? So it becomes part of the staff initiative to join in on this interaction. And a similar thing recently with someone that we discovered, and really simply, and because I'm sitting there and I'm observing a lot, so I've got a lot of observational time, was one of my elders, and I can use her name Laurel, that's quite okay to talk about Laurel. She'll sit like this with her hands tucked underneath, but if her thumbs are out, she's cold. And she actually feels the cold more than most of us. She's a reptile, she's very, very cold. And we discovered this through observing her, and she was being sat at a really nice spot at the table, but right under the air conditioner. So through observation and interacting with her and having her trust where I could check that she was cold, we're able to say in our review, look, Laurel needs to have a jacket. She's colder than everybody else. And that if she does this with her thumbs, this means she's cold. And these things come from observation as well. And of course, this is where I think, and Orquidea might have a view on this, that I think care staff, and of course our activities team don't always have the time to unlock some of these conundrums that we get to observe.
Yeah, fantastic. And I really like this talk about activities that extend beyond specific time frames. It's not 3 to 3:30 is the time we write letters. The manager might be responding to a letter and send it back to this particular person, and it's an ongoing sort of banter and environment that's developing around the individual and their particular interests. So Sarah, you've been waiting very patiently, and jumping over to, how do we use those kind of activities? Do you have any experience in building programs that use activities that extend over a long period of time, over days, weeks, anything like that?
Yeah. So, the one thing, backing up even a step, Lee, you were talking about it, is there has to be the why. Why do we even have engagement, and what are we trying to achieve? Right. And so I think that becomes this first question we have to answer. But when we think about activities or opportunities, it's about growth, right? You don't want to just do something once and then you're done with it. But how do you start something that continues and burns on, and it draws you in, and there's mysteriousness to it, right? You don't know exactly what's going to happen. There's a spontaneity. And so when you think about activities and engagement, we stopped at this. I tried it once, it didn't work, right? But you have to keep offering it and offering it in different ways at different times for different people in a different group, one-on-one. And working through that, I think, is where you learn the most, especially through that observation. But always thinking about, how do I expand upon this next time, right? If I'm going to offer music or art or creative curiosities of sorts, what are the next 4 to 5 after that, and what do they look like? And when I introduce it the first time, I talk about this progression, and I talk about this spontaneity or just interaction that could occur and draw you back over and over.
Fantastic. Lee-Fay, you've done quite a lot of research and advocacy for people living with dementia. How do you think we can integrate activities for people living with dementia and people who aren't living with dementia?
Having dementia or cognitive impairment is a continuum, and definitely in residential settings. To me anyway, you need to cater for everyone, acknowledging that most people will have some kind of cognitive disability. I personally don't like segregating people into with dementia and without dementia. They're all people, and it's our job to unlock the thing that interests them. And often you'll see beautiful friendships come out of activities because they have a shared interest. So, for example, an art program, as Sarah was talking about, building that program over weeks, and we've seen some beautiful programs where they put on an exhibition, and it doesn't matter if you've got dementia or not dementia. They encourage each other, they praise each other, they laugh at what they're doing. And art, for example, is also an activity that can extend beyond that block. The 2 to 3 we do art. Actually, if that person has access to art supplies and they love it, they can do art and drawing, through the day themselves. So we certainly do need to take into account the level of cognition that the person has, but it shouldn't be a distinction within the groups. You're trying to build relationships in those groups.
Fantastic. Kelly, would you like to add?
Yes, and I agree with you, Lee-Fay. And I think when you are planning and programming, that you can do programs and events where people of all abilities can attend. I think what might need to just be addressed is, how do you approach people with those different abilities or cognitive impairments? And I still worked in a community that had multiple levels of care. I think back to, I'm going to go back to singing. We would have a monthly singing group, all levels of care attended, but we just had, as the programming professionals, had to just plan accordingly. So we knew 5 of our residents who lived in memory care. We knew they loved music, they loved singing. We had to assign either someone from my team or somebody from nursing staff who would just go with them. That was part of their responsibility that day, just to make sure, if they had any additional needs, they were fine. And sometimes I did that assignment. And what I found fascinating was when this group of individuals would arrive to this singing event every month, everybody else in the community was so excited and would welcome them with open arms, and they would reintroduce themselves. And, we had done a lot of work internally to coach our residents that, yes, dementia or Alzheimer's or cognitive impairment can be scary, but let's try and educate you so you know that you can still have these relationships with your previous friends and neighbors who may be moved. And so I think there's a significant amount of opportunity when you take the time to flush all that out and educate and be proactive with your residents of all abilities, that then you can also start to stave off maybe some misconceptions or stereotypes that go with aging, but that also go with cognitive impairment, because it is scary. But that doesn't mean that those individuals suffering that aren't still living a full, robust life and they're happy. And so that's what we want to also impart by bringing everybody together.
This is actually quite exciting being part of the conversation, because at the end of the day, we are all reflecting at our own future. It's going to be us one day. And I think we are trying to pave ways or to pave a good foundation for us to be able to enjoy life in the best possible way, regardless of my health or physical abilities or cognitive abilities. But one of the things that I would like to add is that it's not just about the programming. Yes, I do believe as a therapeutic recreation person that there are certain ways or probably programs that will wake up dormant abilities on people. But at the same time, I believe that there is it is extremely important to have a spontaneity in aged care in these environments. I do believe that it's important that we are all on the same page, and that we all have the ability to have the permission to improvise, which is something that when we are working with the care teams, or we are part of the multidisciplinary teams, there is this kind of barrier that we don't feel like we have the permission, like our caregivers, to be silly, or our registered nurses, that they just have a task list that they need to complete. But it's not actually on the task. It's about recognizing that engagement is actually a human right, that at the end of the day, we as humans do things for fun. And that at the end of the day, if when I hopefully, touch wood, I am 90 and I develop severe dementia and I go back to speaking Spanish and I am going around the care home hugging people, someone is going to understand that that's part of my culture, that hugging people, it's actually a good thing, and that is going to help me to settle down, instead of someone thinking, oh my goodness, she has dementia, she's harassing people, we're going to put a proper care plan, she's going to be restrained, let's give her medication. So I think this conversation is extremely important, not just now, but it's about how we can ensure that the knowledge that we have, what we're sharing today, we can share with the teams in a practical way so that we can all be part of the solution.
I love your work. I always have. And, I'm a big fan. And I think what you're talking about is incredible, because we're talking about legacy, and we're talking about our legacy, because we know people say, why do I work in aged care? And basically, because I think I want it to be a bit better when I get in, to be really super blunt. And we talk about climate change and our kids might not see turtles. Well, I kind of think that this is something that we need to fix, because we are soon to go potentially into aged care, and this directly will affect us. And are we happy to go into these environments that we all work in? So that's my first point. Another point, coming back to what I think Sarah talked about, growth and spontaneity. Part of my work and what I try to do is we have to remember that people are going into aged care, and if we don't have a sense of growth, then we are dying, and people need to experience, we all need to experience growth. So one of the things that I think that I like to try and bring, and the team, there's a team of us that do this work called the Outside In Collective, is to focus on the novel. So you have the familiar things that happen in a residential aged care service or a respite centre, but then you try to create novel experiences, and these are spontaneous. You don't know where they're going to go. And so my work is generative. It's not a performance. So I use music quite a lot, but I use many other forms, particularly what I call smart arsery, some people refer to as banter, so that you create a situation, you throw a grenade into the mix with your elder, and you don't know what you're going to get back. And it provides great opportunity, and no one knows what's going to happen. And it's in that space of spontaneity that you talked about, Sarah, where magic happens. And this is what I think can often be forgotten in a residential setting. I think we can forget that we need those spontaneous magical moments where we don't know what's happening.
One of the impediments to spontaneity is the culture in many facilities of the checkbox or the list of things to do. And part of what we do is try and give staff permission to play, permission to connect, work and play aren't opposite. You can play at work, and letting staff be part of that engagement, bring their skills, their musicality or their art or their horse or their child to work as part of the engagement. That's part of changing that culture from checkboxing to being relationship-centered.
Yeah. I think that calendar approach is so structured that it just does not leave space for organic moments when they happen, because we have convinced ourselves that if we do things in this structured manner, that's what people want. And there is some need for structure, but I think that is such a detriment and barrier to your point of what we're doing and how to get better. And I think and we talk about the hours all the time too. Like, why do we staff it the same way we would staff a business? Well, and lastly, until we get past this notion that there's one person or one department responsible for the idea of engagement, we have to think differently. And someone asked the other day, like, what does senior living look like in 5 to 10 years? And I said, I hope so much that there is not an engagement department. There is not one person solely responsible for this interaction during the day, but it is just the culture. And it's a part of everyone's job. And people love doing it. Right? It's not I have to do this, but I cannot wait to interact with the residents in this capacity to experience that that joyfulness.
Yeah, I got to say, coming into some aged care facilities with Silver Adventures and doing virtual reality with seniors as well, I've been kind of struck when people are like, oh, the lifestyle staff aren't here today, so we'll do that later. Like, what? What's that about? Sorry, the fun people aren't here, so we've just got the people who are doing the clinical tasks at the moment. Orquidea, is that, you're representing people who are lifestyle staff and engagement staff. How do they see that kind of divide?
I think it's something that is happening worldwide. So it's not specific to New Zealand. And there is this new movement, which it is not my intention. So I apologize in advance, not being disrespectful, but we have this new movement where we're trying to dilute an essential role for everyone to do the same. And look, I do strongly believe that engagement is everyone's responsibility. But I also believe that if I am a caregiver and I am passionate actually about doing a really good job, and I do a relationships approach to my client, and through that I am engaging someone, that's amazing. But if I am asking a caregiver to actually do the role of someone who absolutely is passionate about recreation, then that's wrong, because we're setting those people for failure. And that's what is happening now. And, once again, it's about connection. It's about understanding. It's about relationships. But in aged care, it's relationships before the task. If you don't build that rapport, and I'm not only talking about your workmates, but most importantly, the people that we care for or that we support, the families. How do we ensure that if I am 100 and I am at the end of my life, I still have a purpose? How do I ensure that there is meaning for me? How do I ensure that people actually supporting me, regardless of your job title, are helping me to feel that sense of belonging within this place, in this moment, in this time? So to me, and look, there's plenty of research, and we're so lucky that Lee-Fay is here today. Plenty of research that shows that as humans, we are wired to be connected. that regardless of the stage of your life, even if it's the last moments of your life, if you have someone holding your hand, it's going to be great so that you can die peacefully. So I believe, once again, that it is important for every single one of us today to advocate for this space in the best possible way. It is our legacy. And most importantly, we definitely need to share this knowledge with everyone. Believe me, I am a pain everyone where I go, regardless of who you are. Like you might be the CEO or the manager or an academic. I always make sure that I talk about engagement. And I actually make them think about themselves. What if it's you? I don't want you to think about the person that you are supporting. It's you. You are 100. You are at the end of your life. How would you like me to look after you? What are the things that you love doing? What did you want me to have ready for you? So just put it back to them. And then you will see how the light bulb suddenly goes on.
Awesome. Hey, something that we've mentioned a couple of times here is this idea of having a regular daytime schedule, that activities end at 3 or 5 o'clock. And I can imagine that one barrier to this for anybody who's programming is listening to that, they might think, well, we don't have the funding or we don't have the staffing to make that sort of thing possible. Does anybody have any sort of solutions of how you can engage residents or care recipients at all hours of the day?
I think it goes back to recognizing that it's not one department's responsibility and that it is a team approach to this. And so, right, there's not money there and more people are not the answer, right? You just put more people on the staff, that's not the answer. But it is this idea that people can recognize. I equate it to this. If you walk into a community, you do not need to be a part of the housekeeping staff to know that there is something on the floor that needs to be picked up, right? If there is trash on the floor, you pick it up. Mm-hmm. If there is food sitting somewhere, you pick it up. We have not got to that point yet that when people are just sitting idly, not engaged, staring at something, that is not necessarily the right approach, right? Just because they're out of the room in a common area does not constitute as engagement. And so we have to teach people to look at what does engagement look like? Again, what is the outcome of engagement? And when you start to recognize that, it's no longer a task of, I need you to come do this. That's not a part of your job because this person is off. So can you please start this movie or pop the popcorn? It is the residents need me to facilitate something so engagement happens, regardless if it's in my exact job task or not. And I would say that starts at management, right? If you're a manager and you don't come out of the office to engage residents and to show by example this, then the staff aren't going to do it either. So it seems simple, but until we say it's not more people, it's not expanding the department, it's solely the responsibility of the current staff, and it can be done.
To riff off that, if we start to think of our activity staff as leaders, activity leaders or clinical leaders in activity, their jobs are to program as and know, figure out what things people engage with and maybe have the stuff there, the art equipment or the right music, but that all staff can put on the iPod or play the right song or have the right conversation with the person. And if John gets up at 9 o'clock at night and he's going to play cards, then the deck of cards needs to be there. Not the activity staff, but that person who's on night shift needs to know that John likes to play cards and have a hot milk at 9 o'clock at night. So your activity staff aren't doing the activities, but they're the leaders in figuring out what happens and, making sure the right people know. And there isn't more money, but you can look at when you schedule your activity staff so that they're on when people are wanting to be active. So many facilities have no one on the weekend, for example, or they all go home at 3 o'clock and people are really active, in the late evening. So the roster can change. We have a lovely program where we have some of our health sciences students living and volunteering in a residential aged care facility, and they do lots of activities on the weekend. They're not there to be clinicians, they're there as volunteers, but they run lots of activities on the weekends and they bring the families in, and it's so fabulous because you've just got someone organising and bringing energy to the place.
And it's that energy too that you're talking about. I think we also think that an activity has to be led by someone up front, and that there's a group of people that are passively consuming the activity. And I think also, I mean, what we try to create often is that when I'm doing my stuff, that the staff are involved in that. And I think you're talking about relationships earlier. People, and it's kind of like entertainment versus engagement, like there's this divide that leaders seem to lean and think you're an entertainer, and there is a very important place for entertaining, don't get me wrong, especially for you, Ash, because you're a musician, but I'm looking at engagement. So when you have people playing, and when I see some group activities, and I know one person that does it so well, is that there's a real banter and a mix going on between the elders and the person leading the activity, but also the staff coming in and joining in. And what the elders at this particular service are part of is this playful environment where people are actually interacting normally and playing with each other, not walking past and having their head down and thinking, I'm not part of that. So it's the way, I think, the culture of the way people see their workspace and they interact, and they feel like there is no license to play. I also think that many people, in my experience, don't always know what questions to ask to get deeper than those surface interests that you talked about earlier. And I think that people also, in my experience, what I've seen is some people are not sure how to invite or entice people into an activity. They kind of say, do you want to feed the birds? And a person that self-isolates or is withdrawn or is sitting in depression is going to say, no, I don't want to do that. And it's kind of more like, have you seen what's out the window? Come, look at this. And it's the way that you entice people into these engagements. And I think that's a skill, and not everyone has that skill. I think it can be modeled. And if you have lifestyle leaders, like you talked about, Lee-Fay, people can model that, but it's something that needs to be shared and learned. And it's a very difficult, it's a very difficult skill. It comes from curiosity. I think curiosity, people talk about what's important in this kind of work, and empathy of obvious is a no-brainer, but curiosity is the other thing. What makes you tick? And when you try to uncover what it is that makes somebody tick, that curiosity flows to authenticity. And that's the other thing that people want. They want you to be authentically interested in who they are and genuinely interested to unlock that. And that requires you also to share some of yourself, I think.
Maurie, I'm so glad you said that about how do you effectively invite or entice people to want to be involved in different opportunities and events. But part of that, yes, I agree with you. It is a skill. It is a gift. I had a former colleague. She was a rock star at this. But when I think back to why she excelled at this so much and how we all tried to emulate her, she knew the residents so well. She knew what the trigger was for each and every person. Like, I remember when I started at this one community and I worked with this person, I would go up and down our assisted living hallway, knocking on doors, inviting people to come to my exercise class, and I'd get a handful. Her name was Elizabeth. She would come up onto that floor and she'd be like, oh, you should have 15 people out here. I'll be right back. And within minutes, I was like, what did you say to them that I didn't say? And so, but I learned from her, and it always came back to she knew the residents so well. She knew exactly what made them tick. So she knew I could just tell this one, remind this one, ask this one, or even just say, hey, come on out. We're having a bunch of people get together. And then they come out and they'd be like, oh, we're exercising. I'd be like, sorry, here we go. But And that is all part of it. But that always goes back to what we've all been saying this evening, is it's the relationships. And it's what is our process to get to know people? And how deep can we go, Maurie? You know, Sara and I always ask the question, what matters most to you today? You know, I think sometimes in our world, people talk about, oh, the big, you know, bucket list items. Do you want to jump out of a plane or go on this like insane trip? But we whittle it down to, no, what matters most today? I want to have lunch with friends. I want to go for a walk. I want to attend that painting class, you know, whatever. And it doesn't need to be these big, bold things. It just means what's going on today that really is important to me, and I want to make sure I follow through on.
And you know, the other thing too, Kelly, is that I always try to find out what drives you nuts. What is it that really annoys you? Because there's a whole lot of fun in that, but there's also, you can walk around that. You know, I hate people that honk their horns when you're letting people in. That drives me nuts. My dad used to hate people that took up 2 car spaces. You know, that was a personal thing. What keeps you awake at night, but what puts you to sleep? And I think all those things, those positive triggers, that I call them, you know, I think they are so important. And all this does stem from relationship. And that's why I think, you know, and I don't mean anything against 𝗡𝗘𝗪, but I think we need to move away from the idea of person-centered care and come back to the term that I hear a lot more now is relationship-based care. You know, it's about relationship. Everything we do is built on relationship and how we relate to each other. And again, I do think curiosity comes from that. But I mean, just to ask Kelly, like you said that you learnt from this worker how she enticed people and invited people. I mean, how open do we think everyone is to having that modeled, you know, and having what they do and their set tasks challenged? I mean, you have to do that very delicately, right? I mean, you're open-minded.
I agree. And it's, I remember when we would have interns or new employees, I would make it part of orientation. You have to go spend 2 hours with Elizabeth to see how she engages and invites residents. Like I ended up making it part of orientation because it was so profound and significant. And people, I mean, and then people would be like, I don't know if I can do that. I'd be like, with time, you'll be able to, because you're going to get to know the residents well over time. But it's, you know, Sara and I say this so often in our work. How often do we just hit pause or stop and ask ourselves, what are we doing? How well do we know our folks? And it all ties together with the schedule of the day and the calendar of offerings. And do we need to be running around like crazy people? And, you know, at one point I was even pushing for an organization, you know, don't do any programs from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. I know, like your face, Maurie, you're like, what? And I was like, let's build some purposeful or intentional downtime into our day. What do most programming people, you know, commiserate about? I don't have enough time to plan to do better with what I offer my residents. When is some downtime organically or naturally for residents? Kind of that midday post lunch. So I'm like, so to me, talking about how do we schedule at hours that are more robust and active, you know, I always think about mid-morning up to lunch and then late afternoon to post dinner, like into the evening. And, you know, something, I can't remember who said something earlier and then I'll stop, but I can't recall the organization here in the United States to give them credit, but an organization came up with a night owl program, and they took a full FTE or full-time employee, which is 40 hours, and they put that 40 hours into having somebody, I want to say they came in around 9 or 10 o'clock at night and worked until like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to engage the people who are naturally night owls and also engage people. So maybe in a memory care neighborhood or memory care community, people who get up in the middle of the night and maybe there's wandering and different behaviors, they were addressing that. And I found this fascinating. I would have to do some deep research to figure out who did this, but it went beautifully for this organization. And so I think the other thing is, coming out of this COVID area, how can we pivot? This is a wonderful time to kind of look at everything we all focus on with resident engagement in such a different fashion, and come up with some new ways to approach it all.
I wanted to share something that might be interesting. My background is in music, as I've said a few times now, and I used to work on cruise ships, and I would program the music on cruise ships. So we would be looking at what times of the day people would want to hear music, what kinds of music they want to hear, and something that we experimented with in bringing in that spontaneous element was, how can we surprise people throughout their night or their day on the ship? And so, they would come out of dinner and there would be a band standing right at the door singing or something, and just trying to throw new ideas at them. So this is very interesting for me to go, oh, actually it's quite similar in how do you actually look at what people want and what would mimic the excitement of real life. And on that, let's take a very short break. Welcome back, everybody, and we've been talking a lot about residential aged care at the moment. Can we talk about home care?
We started looking at this quite a few years ago when we had to change the assessment for home care to put in a section on interests and activities. I think that's improved now, and because home care is usually one-on-one and is usually the same person, each week, or the same few people every week, it's actually easier to build that relationship. You're in the person's home. You can see what makes up their life. And as part of personal care, shopping, recreation, you can really enhance. I think it's easier to enhance the person's engagement when you're one-on-one in a person's home or in the community. Part of it, again, is giving permission to the care staff to have a laugh and have a cup of tea, because their sheet says they're here to clean the house. It doesn't say, and you should stop and have a chat with Janine while you're here, because you're the only person she's seeing today. So having that permission to clean the house, but also stop for a 5-minute cup of tea, because it makes a big difference to Janine. I think, that's where it's going. There's not going to be much more time. So having engagement as part of the other duties is the first thing. In Australia, we have consumer-directed care, and part of it is also, I guess, educating both the care coordinators, the case managers, and the elders and families that it's worthwhile investing in your social health. So people will spend their money on getting their house clean. They'll spend their money on shopping, but they seem to not want to spend their money to have someone take them out, for an ice cream, or to drive them to see their friend they haven't seen for a long time. And because that's seen as frivolous or not essential to care. So part of it is also, I think, educating the planners and elders that this is a really good option to improve their quality of life, and they should invest their funds in that.
It's a total well-being, and you can't separate human components of health versus social well-being and everything else. So you can have great clinical care, but you can be lonely and devastated, right? You can have bad clinical care, but you can have amazing connections and relationships that can be equally important. And so, and it kind of keeps going. It's all about relationships, right? But helping people to understand that your role is not just I don't know why we do this in aged care, but we're so siloed in how we interact and treat or connect with people, and helping. You would never do that with a child or with a middle-aged person. And so why do we separate all of that as we age? And I think that's a basic caregiving lesson that we if you look at any type of education in caregiving, it's just not there. And that play, right? You lose that importance of play because it does seem juvenile, or is it childlike? Is it a waste of my time? And I think the one thing that is also missing in that home care, as we're talking about this, is that same discovery. Kelly and I have had the opportunity to talk with some home care agencies, providers, and that same resident discovery, patient discovery is missing, and it goes straight to a list of diagnoses and conditions that I'm treating. And so again, it has to be that foundational approach of who are you as a person? Clinical chart aside, who are you?
What's the social prescription, really? What needs to be socially prescribed?
It's so easy. Well, not always easy, but it's much easier in someone's house to get to know who they are. There's pictures on the walls, there's memorabilia. It's easier to find to learn who they are. And in some residential aged care facilities, so in some nursing homes, the innovative ones are starting to try and do a home visit before they admit the person to the nursing home, because that's when you really figure out who they are and what they're before that big shock of the change. And so I'm starting to see that, not many places, but they're starting to do those visits, which is really exciting.
Do you think that's the point where, so with home care, that's the point where this information can be garnered and drawn in so that it's present when people do, if they do come into residential aged care? Because it seems to me that, as we know, people are coming into aged care further down, residential, further down their journey of dementia and their care needs. And often that's when it's hardest to bond and form bonds, not only with people like myself, but with the staff and with each other. So it seems that's the primary time to really get your handle around the profile of who is this person, who are they?
That's the ideal, Moz, but even within the one organisation, the home care team don't really talk to the residential care team. So I haven't seen an example. I can't see why it couldn't happen, that when someone moves from home care to residential care, that their care worker kind of helps them transition, talks to the residential care team of what they're interested in and what they like, and might come and, visit them or work on that, on that unit for a bit to really help them. But we don't see any examples of that. I don't even know if they have to say they can share records, they can share the past care plan. So until there's better integration of home care and residential care, so that we have what we call a warm referral, so that the staff from the one team talk to the staff from the other team with the person and their family there, so that it's a more seamless transition. All that knowledge that the home care worker has just sits with them and never moves on to residential.
And this I experienced this in residential as well. But of course, what we're talking about. This is a great area, Ash, for another panel podcast. How to integrate.
Absolutely,
I love the term warm referrals too. But this sharing of knowledge just is incredible. And part of part of the review that I run does try to bring all those in, because people like the cleaners know stuff because they're there at different hours and they know things about people that nobody else knows. But I do get alarmed, Lee-Fay, when you say that we don't know if they talk to each other, because that seems to be a major gap.
Well, they don't talk to each other within the organisation often, because if we try and talk to the two managers, they hardly talk to each other. So I haven't heard of this happening. We see some of these warm handovers from hospital to nursing home teams who know each other very well. And if they're trying to discharge someone from hospital who perhaps has behaviours or, who has special needs, you'll see the hospital team work with the nursing home team and do this warm handover. Whereas I haven't seen any other examples of that, really. And that's unusual, but it does happen.
Hey guys, just to jump in now, sorry, okay, just because we're getting close to the end of time, and not the end of all time, but the end of our time today, and I just wanted to open it up to you all if you have any questions for each other, because we have people here from Australia, New Zealand, America, with various experiences and backgrounds. Does anybody have anything they want to know about, questions they want answered?
I would like to ask, Orquidea, from your point of view, is it predominant that you have a degreed professional or a rec therapist that is overseeing programming in your organizations?
So we have been working on that. Things have changed in the last 5 years. People were not required to have a qualification. Now they do, particularly because under the Minister of Health, you need to have a qualified, in New Zealand, they are called diversional therapies, but it's recreational therapy, in a place where people with dementia, and basically 90% of every care home will have people living with cognitive impairment or someone living with dementia. But not only that, auditors have been working hard on trying to, when they go into audits, certification audits, they will ask if the recreational therapist is actually registered. So that means that it's someone who is meeting national competences, follows a code of ethics, standards of practice. So we are trying in the country, and we're just on the baby steps to make sure that we have consistency on the delivery of care, that activities is not just something to kill the time, to keep people occupied, to entertain, but it's actually a proper profession that should be valued. That's where we are at the moment. Something that I wanted to just quickly make a comment on, regarding home care in New Zealand, there is only one place that I am aware of where they do hire recreational therapists to do education for their caregivers, because they value the importance of training the caregivers on how, okay, you're going to be doing tasks, but how do you do it so that you can actually facilitate and foster social engagement? So they're working really hard on that. And I have actually done quite a few training for the teams. And from the New Zealand perspective, and I don't know how much people are aware of, so we follow the Treaty of Waitangi principles, and that's kind of embedded as part of the delivery of care that we do. So people's culture and trying to close the gap on inequality, it's quite strong in our country. It's something that you just can't get away with it. It's about Maori people, but at the same time, people from all cultures. So the Maori point of view, it's about people of all cultures and how we support everyone, not just one specific ethnicity. Yes, so yeah, it's kind of a unique place, to be honest, and to facilitate engagement. But we still have a lot of room for improvement. But we have, by having a strong advocates and touching the right doors to the right people, it works. Yes.
I didn't have anything to add on that. I was curious about what happened to diversional therapists. They seem to be disappearing from residential aged care. I recall there was more, and I sort of feel that, I want to be careful how I say this, but I feel that there's a certain rigor to, studying intensely, diversion. And when I say that, I mean, methodologies and modalities of engagement. But I do kind of wonder, what's happened to our DTs. They don't seem to be as prevalent in the service anymore. I don't know if I'm right or wrong there.
I would agree, Maurie, that there's certainly no requirement that we have in Australia that we have an accredited DT. DTs generally are less valued than the other allied health. I think that would be reasonable. And it's very unusual to find a qualified DT in a nursing home now.
I worry about that. I think I'd mentioned that to you before. I just wondered if I could briefly sort of ask about families, and because anyone listening to this that is a family member, I wondered what the others thought, because I think families sit on this gold mine of information about their loved one, their mum, their dad, their auntie. And more often than not, what I see is that there's this massive, and I know from personal experience with my mum, that there's this massive forms that you have to fill out to get mum and dad into the service. And then the last one at the bottom that is not required to be filled out at any point in time and often gets left is tell us about your mum or your dad. And I know that's a source of frustration for a lot of activities teams. But there's also something else that I see with families, that when I ask about, what did your dad do? What did he like? And he doesn't like anything. He's got dementia. There's a resignation to this, and it's really hard, and it's a stumbling block for the teams. But I think again it comes back to asking questions, because I was doing some research a while ago for a company, and I started to ask, that's cool, I understand that, but before you go, can I ask, what did Dad do when he came home from work? And it would be like, he'd get into his gumboots, take his business shirt off, and he'd go out in the garden. Oh, what did he do? Oh, we had a fern house. Oh, ferns, orchids, he loved them. And there it is. There's the thing that you're looking for. But I think families don't realise the goldmine of information they sit on, which can help us to understand all the things that Sarah and Kelly and Orquidea and Lee-Fay have talked about, is to know who this person is. And when someone is progressively along their journey of dementia, and if they're maybe not communicating in a way that we can understand, it's often if the family members don't give you the information, it's lost, it's not known. And I think there's a really big gap here too that we could fill, and finding ways of engaging families to give us those stories.
I totally agree that family is the wealth of knowledge. I think the hardest part is when you get that written content, or when you get that information, where does it go? Right? Because we can't just keep living in notebooks. So what is the repository, exactly like Kelly said at the beginning, that we can pull this information up and it's pushed to us, to the care team, rather than going to search for it in a binder.
Guys, we've covered so much today. This has been really fascinating, very interesting for me, and great to kind of have a new group of people together in a room, a virtual room together, to talk about these ideas. Thank you so much for your time, Sarah, Maurie, Kelly, Orquidea, and Lee-Fay. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ash. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Aged Care Enrichment Podcast, brought to you by Silver Adventures. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And if you're enjoying it, please leave us a review. We'd really appreciate it. If you're interested in finding out how immersive virtual reality experiences can enrich the lives of older adults, visit the Silver Adventures website today at www.silver, that's SILVR, adventures.com.au. See you next week.